What it do, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you guys so much for tuning in once again. This is Triple DS. I made a video like this last year where I ranked every single quarterback for each team from 1 to 32, and I'm back here to do it again. Now, if you don't remember, or if this is your first time watching this series, the rules are as follows. It's one quarterback per team. So guess what? That means no Joe Flacco, no Jake Browning, and no Jimmy G. This only accounts for this season, and regular season only. Each category is worth up to 32 points, and points are given based off of where the quarterback ranks in each category. The categories are pass yards, total touchdowns, completion percentage, total quarterback rating or QBR, passer rating, game-winning drives, and rush yards. The only difference in this particular part of the criteria is game-winning drives, whereas before I had them ranked, they're kind of more so bonus points now. So per game-winning drive, they're now worth 5 points each. This list is only compared to other quarterbacks. If quarterbacks are tied in points, tiebreakers are decided by QBR, all points are added up, and the final score is given to the quarterback. Thank you guys for watching, and please subscribe to the channel. We are on the road to 1,600 subs. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and begin with number 32. At number 32, we have Will Levis with only 24 points. Will Levis unfortunately went into a situation where it was a disaster on offense. Despite his best efforts, he was ranked 31st in passing yards, total touchdowns ranked 29th, dead last in completion percentage, 3rd worst in QBR, 24th in passer rating, and had only one game-winning drive. Maybe things will turn around for him, but for my list, he ranks 32nd in the NFL. Coming in at 31, we have Kenny Pickett with 36 points. Pickett had a rough year, and a lot of people could argue that it was due to the fact that Matt Canada was his coordinator, but once he was booted out of Pittsburgh, Pickett unfortunately got hurt. He ended the year ranked 29th in passing yards, tied for 32nd in total touchdowns. His completion percentage and QBR good for 5th worst in the NFL. Passer rating, 6th worst. Not enough rush yards to qualify for any points. But what saves Kenny Pickett from being bottom of the barrel is the fact that he had 3 game-winning drives. Puts him a little bit past Will Levis, but at the end of the day, he's still only the 31st best quarterback ranked. Coming in at number 30, we have, surprisingly but not surprisingly, Deshaun Watson. When he was playing, you could tell something felt a bit off. You were kind of just waiting for him to kind of get going. But to be honest, those days may be over. Despite a 5-1 record, Watson could not even qualify for pass yards on my list, giving him 0 for that category. He was tied for 30th place in total touchdowns. Completion percentage, tied for 4th worst. QBR was good enough to get him 25th place, passer rating 24th place, and game-winning drives, well, to be fair, he did actually have one. He actually had rushing yards that gave him some sort of ranking. And this is the perfect time to explain how my tiebreakers work again. So, Kenny Pickett and Deshaun Watson both had 36 points. Deshaun Watson's QBR was 43.5, whilst Kenny Pickett's was 38.8, thus giving the edge to Deshaun Watson. Still nowhere near worth the $230 million contract he was given, especially after you saw what Flacco did. Coming in at 29th, we have Mac Jones. Mac Jones had an abysmal year. Mac Jones with just over 2,100 yards passing ranked 28th. Only had 10 total touchdowns, good enough for 28th again. What saves him here a little bit is his completion percentage, good enough for 17th. QBR, abysmal. Passer rating, 2nd worst. Rushing yards, 96, good enough for the last qualifying spot in rushing yards. So you got a point there. Overall, Mac Jones has 38 points, which is not great, and it looks like his time in New England may be over. Coming in at 28th place, we have Aiden O'Connell. O'Connell had just over 2,200 yards passing, good enough for 27th place. He had 13 total touchdowns, good enough to tie for 26th. QBR 26, completion percentage, a lot to be desired, only finishing in 27th, passer rating 25th. He also had one game-winning drive, just edging out Mac Jones by 1 point. Alright guys, we are now in the below average category. These names weren't bottom of the barrel, but you'd be highly doubtful as to think of them as a long-term future. But you know what? I'll leave it up to you. Coming in at 27th, we have Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson was not expected to play this year, but 4 plays into the Jets season, Wilson was back under center. Wilson did do better than last year, but that's not saying much. He finished 26th in passing yards, tied for 30th in total touchdowns, completion percentage, passer rating, both 30th, dead last in QBR. What saves Zach Wilson from being lower is that he did have 2 game-winning drives, and he is a bit of a mobile quarterback, finishing with 211 rush yards, good enough for 16th place among quarterbacks. Overall, he finishes with 44 points and 4 spots better than he did last year. Again, not saying much. In 26th place, arguably the furthest drop on my list, we have Daniel Jones. Just for the record, remember, if you ranked 32nd or worse in the ranking, you get 0 points for that category. Daniel Jones finished 42nd in passing yards, 33rd in total touchdowns. He only had 3. QBR ranked 29th, passer rating 33rd. Guess what that means?
0 points.
Game-winning drive, just 1, but that only gives you 5 points. All in all, Daniel Jones had a horrible year. So what saves him? How is he not 32nd? Somehow, some way, he was able to keep his completion percentage relatively well, finishing in 7th place with a rather surprising 67.5 percentage. That keeps him at 26, making below average, but honestly, man, sometimes I wonder why I'm doing these statistical lists. In 25th place, we have Bryce Young. Bryce Young had a so-so year, and it's unfortunate because most rookies used to play like he's playing now, but because of how the game has changed, this is not the norm anymore. So Bryce Young, in many people's eyes, already looks like a bust. I'm not one of those, but let's go ahead and read these statistics. Among all quarterbacks, finished 20th in pass yards, tied for 28th in total touchdowns, had the second worst completion percentage, and second worst QBR. He had the worst quarterback passer rating, but he did have 2 game-winning drives for 10 extra bonus points, and he was a pretty mobile quarterback at the end of the day, running for over 250 yards. All in all, good enough to finish 25th in these rankings. In 24th place, we have Joe Burrow. Burrow had a horrible year that started off with injury. As he finally got better, he got hurt for the rest of the year, finishing 25th in passing yards. Total touchdowns, good enough for 24th place tied. Completion percentage, pretty decent. 10th place. QBR, 20th place. Passer rating, 18th. Unfortunately for Burrow, no game-winning drives, and he did not rank anywhere to make any points in rush yards. Burrow was the number 2 quarterback on my list last year, so it's sad to see how far he fell. And at least for this Bengals fan, I can only hope things get better from here. In 23rd place, we have Gardner Minshew with 76 points. Throughout all of his statistics, Minshew was middle of the pack for most categories, finishing middle of the pack in really passing yards, QBR. Well, actually, that's it. Everything else was below average. Finished 22nd in total touchdowns, completion percentage 26th, passer rating 23rd, had 2 game-winning drives, and he had exactly 100 rush yards. In 22nd place, we have Desmond Ridder. Ridder was not relatively good, but he wasn't terrible, and I think that's why Ridder gets forgotten a lot. He was nowhere near the abysmal performances by Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, or anyone like that, but this was still not impressive either, especially given the weapons that the Falcons had. He's ranked in 20th place or worse in every single category. But Ridder's saving grace was the fact that he is actually pretty clutch. He had 4 game-winning drives. Good enough for 81 points, just edging out Minshew by 5 points. In 21st place, we have Josh Dobbs. Now, Josh Dobbs, I'm going to explain a little bit because he was the only quarterback on this list that played for multiple teams. What I decided to do is that even though he qualified for the Arizona Cardinals, I took into account what he did for the Vikings. At the end of the day, it still counts as NFL statistics, so I'm going to give him credit for what he did on the Vikings, if that makes sense.
Nope.
Dobbs finished 23rd in passing yards, total touchdowns 20th, completion percentage 24th, QBR 21st, passer rating good for 28th, had only 1 game-winning drive, but he had 421 rush yards, good enough for 5th place, jolting him up to 21st. Coming in at number 20, we have Justin Fields with 85 points. Fields was fighting for the Bears to not draft his replacement. Did he do enough? The jury's still out. I think the Bears will keep him, but we'll see. Fields at the end of the day finishes 22nd in pass yards. Total touchdowns 19th. Completion percentage, he went 29th. He really needs to improve there. QBR 24th. Passer rating 22nd, and only 1 game-winning drive. What saves Justin Fields is what saved him last year, the fact that he's a true mobile quarterback, compiling 657 rush yards, good enough for 2nd most among quarterbacks, which is extra impressive if you remember that he did miss some time with injury. Alright guys, we've now gotten to the mid-tier, and in mid, starting it off, we have Sam Howell. Sam Howell was actually pretty fun to watch, as honestly you didn't know what he would be doing next. He had pretty high passing yards, almost getting 4,000 in the year, good enough for 12th place. He even had 26 total touchdowns, good enough for 12th place again. Where he lacked is precision. he finished 23rd in percentage, 25th in QBR, and 29th in passer rating. He gave Washington 2 game-winning drives and was good enough for 10th in rushing yards. While that was a decent year statistically, I don't know if it was enough to keep his job, especially when there is a new coach coming to Washington. Coming in at number 18, we have Matthew Stafford with 102 points. Matthew Stafford did start off the year a little slow, but he picked it up, especially in the second half of the season, and it shows in his statistics. Stafford almost threw for 4,000 passing yards, good enough for 11th. He had 24 total touchdowns, which kept him middle of the pack. What holds Stafford back in a big way was his completion percentage. At only 62.6, it dropped to 25th, as his QBR and passer rating are 6th and 15th, respectively. Now, rushing yards, he had only 65, so he didn't get any points for that. But, you got to remember, this guy is, I'm not going to say he's approaching 40, but he's approaching 40.
I'm a man! I'm 40!
Coming in at number 17, we have Kirk Cousins with 107 points. Now, Kirk Cousins was having arguably one of the best years of his career up until his season-ending injury. And some people wonder, why do I do these statistics the way I do? If Kirk Cousins was that good, why don't you rank him accordingly? Well, guess what? Part of my rankings factors in availability. So if you're available, guess what you're going to do? You're going to play more games. If you play more games, you can get more points. The best ability is availability. Remember that. Kirk Cousins finished 24th in passing yards, total touchdowns 21st. He did tie for 2nd in completion percentage and was good for 8th place in QBR, 3rd place in passer rating. Now, one huge thing that Kirk Cousins had going for him last year was game-winning drives. Whereas he had 8 last year, he had 0 this year before he unfortunately got hurt. So he ranks middle of the pack or mid for this season. Up next, we have Derek Carr with 109 points, just edging out Kirk Cousins. Carr finished 13th in passing, tied for 14th in total touchdowns, 6th best completion percentage, middle of the pack in QBR, 10th best passer rating, and had 1 game-winning drive. Was it good enough for the Saints to keep him long-term? We'll wait and see. I expect the Saints to at least give him another year. Coming in at 15th place, we have Geno Smith. Smith, for the most part, is a lot of middle-of-the-pack numbers. All of his statistics finished between 16th and 23rd place. But what gives Geno some extra points is his game-winning drives. He had 5, good enough for an extra 25 points. Coming in at 14th place, we have Justin Herbert. Let me put it this way. Herbert was having a bad year, yes, but it was to his standards. Herbert has been an outstanding quarterback for the Chargers. And with weapons like Williams, Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnson, and Eckler, among others, it felt like a disappointment up until the point that he got hurt. At the end of the day, he still finished the year middle of the pack in almost every category in pass yards, total touchdowns, completion percentage, passer rating, and rush yards. The only thing that stood out the most was his QBR, which was good for 5th place among quarterbacks. All in all, 119 points, and he drops by 9 in my rankings from last year. In 13th place, we have Baker Mayfield with a total of 120 points. Baker Mayfield last year ranked dead last in my rankings, so it's nice to see that he is skyrocketed up. In total for the Bucs, Baker Mayfield finished 9th place in passing yards, 7th best in total touchdowns, middle of the pack for QBR and completion percentage, had enough rushing yards to give him some points, and had 2 game-winning drives as a result, just edging out the other 2 by exactly 1 point. Alright, and to top off my mid-tier, this guy doesn't feel like he had a mid-tier kind of year, but that goes to show you just how good the other quarterbacks were. At number 12, we have C.J. Stroud. Stroud finished the season 8th in passing yards, 13th place in total touchdowns, a completion percentage that could be better. This is really what's holding him back, finishing in 22nd place. Middle of the pack for QBR at 16th, but had an outstanding passer rating, which was at 100.8, good enough for 6th place. Not to mention, Stroud also had 2 game-winning drives and ranked 21st among quarterbacks rushing. This was good enough for 122 points, edging out the last 3 by just a handful of points. Alright guys, from here on up, it's nothing but a great season. And in 11th place, we have Trevor Lawrence. This is another reason why I like to look at the statistics, because if you look just towards the end of the season, never in a million years could you imagine that Trevor Lawrence did statistically better than CJ Stroud. But here we are. If you look at the side-by-side between him and Stroud, Stroud actually has the upper hand on most of these categories. So how does Lawrence get above him as far as total points go? One big factor was the completion percentage. Whereas 63.9 is only good enough for 22nd place, Trevor Lawrence's 65.6 is good enough for 14th And he was a much more mobile quarterback, good enough for 9th place with his 339 rush yards. Overall, this is what keeps Lawrence above Stroud, but I wouldn't blame you if you thought Stroud had the better year overall. Remember, this is a statistical only list. Now we're getting to the top 10, and starting off in 10th place, we have Jared Goff. Arguably having the greatest season of his career, that's including his time with the Rams. Goff finished in 2nd place as far as pass yards go. Total touchdowns ranked 6th. Completion percentage 7th. Passer rating 9th. 3 game-winning drives. Unfortunately, what keeps him from becoming higher on this list is his QBR, only middle of the pack. At 59.8, it was only good enough for 15th place, and on top of that, Jared Goff is not the most mobile quarterback. He could not qualify with his putrid 21 rush yards. At number 9, this one's a bit surprising, but we have Russell Wilson. Despite not playing the last few games of the season, Wilson actually had a pretty good year, all things considered. Don't let Sean Payton's attitude towards Wilson fool you. Wilson had a pretty good year, all things considered. Was it worth his contract? I'll leave that up to you guys. All in all, he finished middle of the pack for completion percentage, pass yards, and QBR. Despite being in his mid-30s, he is still very mobile. Good enough for 8th place in rushing yards, and having 29 total touchdowns, which is good enough for 7th place. Passer rating was also huge for him, as he finished in 8th place among quarterbacks. And one thing that Russell Wilson has always been in his career is clutch. He proved it again this year, having 4 game-winning drives. Is Russell Wilson a top 10 quarterback in the NFL? According to the stats, he is. Coming in at number 8, we have Tua Tagovailoa. In a year where he needed to prove it, I do believe that he did, albeit not in the playoffs. Tua finished 1st in passing yards, tied for 7th for total touchdowns, had the 5th best completion percentage, 10th best QBR, 5th best passer rating, even had 2 game-winning drives to boot, but no points for rushing yards as he did not qualify. Overall, this was a step above for Tua in year 2 with Tyreek Hill and year 2 with Mike McDaniel. I'm excited to see what happens next. We'll see if he gets that extension at the end of the day. Coming in at number 7, it is Jordan Love with 150 points. Jordan Love surprised everyone, especially down the stretch, finishing 7th in passing yards. He had the 4th most touchdowns with 36. Had a 62 QBR, which was good enough for 9th. Had 3 game-winning drives. Had a passer rating of 11. And even had some rush yards. He finished in 12th place with 247. So why is Love not even higher on this list? What holds Love back at the end of all of this is his completion percentage. He had 64.2, which is not terrible, but it's only good enough for 20th place. If the completion percentage gets cleaned up, look out. This guy is going to be dangerous for years to come, and it looks like the Packers struck gold yet again with a franchise quarterback. Coming in at number 6, we have Jalen Hurts. If we ended this ranking by the end of the first half of the season, Hurts could have arguably been number 1. He still finished with the 14th most passing yards, 15th best completion percentage, 12th best QBR, 2nd best total touchdowns with 38, 15 rushing touchdowns. You know, he's got to thank the tush push for his ranking this year. But he did pretty good rush yards overall anyway with 605. Good enough for 3rd place overall. I'm not sure what happened to Jalen Hurts in the second half of the season, but in the first half of the season, he was also proving that he was clutch, having 4 game-winning drives. Hurts and the Eagles look to be on a downward spiral, so we'll see what happens next year, but at least for the statistics this year, he's good enough for 6th place. Now, for our top tier, this is best of the best, or MVP candidate. Every single name on this list has had MVP consideration, some more than others, but let's see what the statistics say as who's the best of the best. Coming in at number 5, we have Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes was number 1 on my list last year, and that's no surprise that he's top 5 again this year, and that's despite his wide receivers letting him down week in and week out. Mahomes still finished with the 6th most pass yards. He had the 7th best QBR as well as the 7th most rushing yards. He had 2 game-winning drives, good for an extra 10 points. He had middle of the pack numbers for total touchdowns and passer rating, and had tied for 8th in completion percentage. All in all, Patrick Mahomes gets 155 points. Not enough to be the best this year, but he's still in the top 5. And of course, you're always going to hear Patrick Mahomes as an MVP candidate. Coming in at number 4, we have Brock Purdy with 158 points. Purdy edges out Mahomes in a lot of these categories. 5th in passing yards, 5th in total touchdowns, 4th best completion percentage, the very best passer rating. With these first 5 ratings, you'd think Brock Purdy's number 1 on this list. Unfortunately, the next 2 categories bring him back down to earth, as far low as an MVP candidate could go anyway. Unfortunately for Purdy and the Niners, they had 0 game-winning drives, and you can't even argue that Purdy did not have a chance to win some of the games that they lost. So, out the window goes the clutch factor, and that's always been a huge question mark for Brock Purdy. Can he be clutch? Could he bring a team back? And he only finished in 24th place as far as rushing yards are concerned. When you got the likes of Debo, Kittle, Ayuk, and CMC in the backfield, you don't have to run as much. Doesn't mean you can't prove it though. Good enough for 24th and good enough for 4th place. At number 3, we have Lamar Jackson with 159 points. When Lamar Jackson is healthy, he is as dangerous as any quarterback could be in the NFL. The arguable MVP finished 15th in total passing yards. Total touchdowns had 29, good enough for 7th place tied. Tied for the 8th best completion percentage, 4th best QBR, 4th best passer rating. One thing that held Lamar Jackson back is that he did not have any game-winning drives. But to balance that out, Lamar Jackson was ranked number 1 in rush yards, and that's by at least another 100 yards from the next best person. Which brings us to number 2, and that is Josh Allen. Josh Allen, when he limits his turnovers, is the most dangerous quarterback in the NFL. I said what I said. When he's on, he is on.
False.
Josh Allen finished with the 4th most passing yards at just over 4,300. He had the most total touchdowns at 44. 15 of those were rushing touchdowns, and this ain't no tush pushes either. He finished with the 3rd best QBR and had 4 game-winning drives to go along with being the 4th best runner in the NFL with 524 rush yards. What keeps Josh Allen away from being the best quarterback on my list is his completion percentage, which, to be fair, from last year was a major improvement, but still only good enough for 11th place. The other thing holding him back was his passer rating. That kind of goes hand in hand with his turnovers too. If those get cleaned up, don't be surprised if Allen is number 1 on my list next year. But as far as for this year's concerned, at number 1, we have Dak Prescott. Trust me, y'all, I am a Bengals fan. I have no bias over this. I am just a numbers guy. And statistically speaking, Prescott was the best quarterback in the NFL this year. Prescott finished 3rd in passing yards. He tied for the 2nd most touchdowns. He finished with the 2nd best QBR and the 2nd best passer rating. Now, these numbers are very similar to Brock Purdy, but here's the difference. Where Brock Purdy was ranked 24th in rush yards, Prescott was ranked 14th with 242 rushing yards. Prescott did prove he can be clutch if he has to be, at least in the regular season. Don't get me started on the playoffs. He had 3 game-winning drives, so it gave him an extra 15 points all said and done. At the end of the day, you can always look at the game, you can visualize, you can see who's actually better than the others, but I like to do it this way. I like to go by the numbers because you'd be surprised who's ranked above who. Who would have expected Lawrence to be above Stroud? Who would have thought Burrow would be this low on the list? Who would have guessed that Zach Wilson wasn't in last place? So I love making this kind of list, and let me know if you guys enjoyed watching it too. If this is your first time on the channel, go ahead and smash that subscribe button as well as leaving a like and comment what kind of videos you like to see. If you've made it this far, I can only say thank you guys so much, and until next time, y'all, shoot, boy! Yeah.